The crowds in St. Peter's Square fell silent as a wealthy American tourist, drunk on privilege and wine, spat directly into the face of Swiss Guard Matteo Rossi. For one frozen moment, honor and dignity collided at the very heart of Vatican City. What happened next would teach the world that true strength lies not in retaliation, but in unwavering character. Guard Matteo Rossi adjusted his ceremonial uniform one last time as morning light hit the cobblestones of St. Peter's Square. At 29, he had spent 5 years serving as one of the Swiss Guard, the Pope's personal protective corps, famous for their Renaissance-style uniforms of blue, red, and yellow stripes. But beneath the traditional beret and white gloves lay the hands of a soldier who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Each morning began the same way for Rossi. 3 hours before dawn, he would rise in his modest quarters within Vatican City, methodically preparing every detail of his uniform. Every button polished to mirror shine, every strap and buckle aligned with military precision. To outsiders, it might seem excessive for what tourists often dismissed as ceremonial duty, but Rossi understood the deeper truth. The uniform carried centuries of tradition. Each crease and fold represented the unwavering dedication of those who came before him. It wasn't just about standing guard. When he put on this uniform, he became a living symbol of something greater than himself. Every tourist's photo, every child's wave, every provocation from visitors, he faced with the dignity this position demanded. On this particular Thursday, the security protocol was operating in its usual 3-tier system. The inner circle consisted of Swiss guards like Rossi, providing close protection. The middle circle was managed by the Gendarmeria Vaticana, Vatican police, who handled crowd control. The outer perimeter remained under the watch of Italian security forces, the Carabinieri. As noon approached, thousands of pilgrims and tourists filled the square. Families with children pointed excitedly at the papal balcony. Elderly faithful clutched rosaries and prayer books. Street vendors moved carefully through the crowd, aware that this was hallowed ground, demanding reverence. Among the sea of respectful visitors, a group of Americans made their way toward Rossi's position. They moved with the confident swagger of those accustomed to getting their way. Leading them was Kevin Reynolds, a young man from Texas whose expensive polo shirt and designer sunglasses couldn't quite mask the entitled smirk that played across his face. Reynolds wasn't used to being ignored. Back home in Dallas, his family's oil wealth ensured that restaurant servers materialized at his slightest gesture. The business executives hung on his every word. Even here in Rome, first-class flights and 5-star accommodations had maintained his comfortable bubble of deference. But now, standing before the stoic figure of Guard Rossi, he faced something his money couldn't influence: genuine, unmovable dignity. The morning had started typically for Reynolds and his friends. Champagne breakfast at the Hotel de Russi, where staff had fawned appropriately. Shopping at Via del Corso's boutiques, where attendants offered private viewings. But as the day wore on and the drinking continued, a familiar restlessness began to stir within Reynolds. That nagging need to prove himself, to assert his importance in increasingly dramatic ways. "Hey, look at this guy," Reynolds called out to his friends, his Texas drawl cutting through the reverent atmosphere. "Bet you €50 I can make him crack." His 3 companions, already filming with their phones, snickered in anticipation. They'd spent the morning drinking their way through Rome's finest establishments, their American Express black cards opening doors that would remain closed to lesser mortals. Now, with liquid courage coursing through their veins, they were ready for what Reynolds called some real entertainment. The first attempts were predictable. Reynolds posed beside Rossi for selfies, making exaggerated faces and throwing peace signs. "Come on, buddy, smile for the camera," he laughed. His friends encouraged him, drawn by the growing attention from other tourists who had stopped to watch. A small crowd began to form, phones raised to capture whatever might unfold. A nearby vendor slowly pushed his cart away, sensing trouble with the instinct of someone who'd witnessed similar scenes before. Rossi remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead. In his mind, he recited the oath he'd taken 5 years ago. He'd faced worse. The scars on his left shoulder from Helmand Province proved that. This was nothing, just another tourist who'd forgotten his manners. But Reynolds was just getting started. Emboldened by his audience and frustrated by Rossi's composure, he stepped closer. The expensive wine on his breath mingled with designer cologne as he invaded the guard's personal space. "What's with the funny costume, man? Did you lose a bet?" He reached toward Rossi's bray, stopping just short. Even in his inebriated state, some small part of him remembered warnings about physically interfering with the guards. A middle-aged Italian woman in the crowd spoke up sharply. "Rispetto! Show some respect!" She clutched her handbag tighter, her knuckles white with indignation. But her words only seemed to fuel Reynolds' determination. He turned to the crowd with an exaggerated bow, playing to his growing audience. Respect for what? Standing there like a mannequin? The bitterness in his tone made several American tourists exchange embarrassed glances, as if trying to distance themselves from their countrymen's behavior. Through it all, Rossi remained still, but his trained mind stayed active. 8 years of military service had taught him to observe, assess, and prepare. He noted everything, the way Reynolds' friends had spread out to film from different angles, the uncomfortable shuffling of other tourists, the subtle hand signals between gendarmeria officers positioned around the square's perimeter. There was something different about Reynolds' behavior from the usual troublemakers. A calculated edge to his actions, a deliberate escalation that set off warning bells in Rossi's trained mind. The man was working himself up to do something truly foolish. The morning bells of St. Peter's Basilica chimed, their deep tones carrying across the square. Rossi had been at his post since dawn, his muscles trained to maintain perfect stillness despite fatigue, discipline perfected during countless ceremonies. "Maybe he's broken," Reynolds announced, moving to stand directly in front of Rossi. His expensive loafers scuffed against the ancient cobblestones as he steadied himself. "Hey, robot, anyone home?" He waved his hand inches from Rossi's face, close enough that the guard could smell the expensive Brunello on his breath. The crowd had grown larger now, a mix of entertained onlookers and increasingly concerned observers. Some had stopped filming, their discomfort evident in lowered phones and averted gazes. A young couple hurried their children away, shooting disapproving looks over their shoulders. But Reynolds' friends remained ecstatic. "This is going viral for sure," one called out, adjusting his camera angle. "Do that thing we talked about, Kev." Their excitement had the desperate edge of people trying too hard to believe they were having fun. A young girl, no more than 8, tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama, perché quest'uomo è così cattivo?" Her innocent question, "Why is that man being so mean?" caused several onlookers to shift uncomfortably. Reynolds either didn't hear or chose to ignore the child's words, too far gone in his performance to register the impact of his actions. Instead, he turned to his audience with arms spread wide like a showman. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice took on a theatrical quality, "I think it's time we found out if these guards are actually human." There was something ugly beneath the performance, a desperate need to prove something, to assert dominance over this symbol of authority that stood before him, unflinching and unimpressed. Rossi felt his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. In Afghanistan, he'd learned to read people, to sense when a situation was about to escalate beyond the point of no return. That same instinct was screaming at him now. But his training held firm. He remained motionless, even as Reynolds moved closer, even as the air grew thick with tension. Reynolds circled Rossi, testing his limits. But he'd misjudged completely. He wasn't the predator here. "You know what I think?" Reynolds announced to his increasingly uncomfortable audience. "I think these guys are just scared. Scared to move. Scared to speak. Scared to be real. They hide behind tradition because they're too weak to face reality." Rossi's mind flashed to Helmand Province, 3 hours under fire, protecting wounded men. Weak wasn't in his vocabulary. Reynolds leaned in closer, his designer sunglasses now hanging loosely from his collar. What do they even do here anyway? Stand around like statues while the world laughs at them? He turned to his friends, who continued filming despite the visible discomfort on their faces. Even they seemed to sense that a line was about to be crossed. An elderly man with a Vatican tour guide badge stepped forward from the crowd. "Signore, basta così. That's enough. You've had your fun." But Reynolds was beyond hearing reason. The combination of expensive wine, wounded pride, and an audience had created a perfect storm of poor judgment. You want to know what I think of your precious tradition? Reynolds's face contorted with contempt and desperate need for attention. Time seemed to slow as he gathered saliva in his mouth. Later, dozens of phone videos would capture this moment from various angles, but none would fully convey the sudden, horrified silence that fell over the crowd. The spittle hit Rossi's cheek. The square went silent. Reynolds smirked, expecting victory. Rossi didn't move. The saliva ran down his face, but his expression never changed. One man swayed drunk and entitled. The other stood unbreakable. The silence was broken by the sound of running feet. Swiss Guard Captain Lorenzo Bianchi and his patrol had noticed the commotion, their ceremonial halberds glinting in the sunlight as they moved through the crowd with practiced precision. Behind them, gendarmeria officers were also approaching, their modern uniforms a stark contrast to the Renaissance-style garb of the papal guards. Reynolds, suddenly aware that his actions might have consequences, took a stumbling step backward. His friends had lowered their phones, the reality of what they'd just filmed finally sinking in. One of them muttered, "Kev, man, what did you do?" The crowd had expanded into a full circle now, nobody wanting to stand too close to either man, but nobody leaving either. They could sense that history was about to be made, though not in the way Reynolds had intended. Rossi's eyes locked onto Reynolds, the same focus that had tracked enemies across Afghan mountains. Not anger, something more powerful. Centuries of duty concentrated into a single stare. "Guard!" Captain Bianchi's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Stand down!" The command, delivered with quiet authority, gave Rossi permission to do something he hadn't done in 6 hours of duty: move. The motion was deliberate, precise, and somehow more intimidating than any sudden action could have been. Rossi pivoted 45 degrees, came to attention, and saluted his superior with textbook precision. "Sir, permission to address the situation." Granted, what happened next would be described by witnesses in dozens of different ways. Some would call it a speech, others a lesson, and still others would describe it as one of the most powerful moments they'd ever witnessed. But all would agree on one thing: they had never seen dignity quite like this. Rossi wiped the spit from his cheek. When he spoke, every word carried weight. "5 years ago, I took an oath," he began, his words clear and measured, carrying across the square despite their quiet tone. "Not just to His Holiness, but to everything these walls represent: duty, honor, sacrifice." His eyes found Reynolds, who had suddenly lost all traces of his previous bravado. "While you were in that wine bar working up the courage to come here and make a spectacle of yourself, I was standing guard over principles that have endured for over 500 years. The crowd was absolutely silent now. Phones continued recording, but they hung forgotten in hands that had gone limp with awe. "You see this uniform?" Rossi continued, his voice carrying across the cobblestones. "Before I earned the right to wear it, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've watched brothers in arms fall defending the values you mock. This isn't a costume, sir. It's a symbol of dedication that you clearly cannot comprehend." He turned slightly, addressing the broader crowd now. "Every day we stand here, not as statues or tourist attractions, but as living reminders of the discipline and sacrifice required to protect what matters. We endure the heat, the cold, the rain, and yes, even the occasional person who mistakes our restraint for weakness." Reynolds, attempting to salvage some dignity, opened his mouth to speak, but Captain Bianchi's sharp glance silenced him immediately. 2 gendarmeria officers had arrived and were standing ready, but they too seemed captivated by Rossi's words. "You wanted to know if we're human?" Rossi's voice took on a softer tone, though it lost none of its power. "We are. We feel every insult, every joke, every attempt to break our composure. But we stand firm because that's what duty demands. Because some things in this world are bigger than personal comfort or pride. Some principles deserve protection, even from those who don't understand them." He turned back to Reynolds, who had begun to visibly shrink under the weight of the moment. "You came here hoping to create a viral video to get your moment of internet fame. Congratulations, sir. You've succeeded, but not in the way you intended. Instead of exposing weakness, you've demonstrated exactly why we stand here day after day. Because there must always be those who stand firm against disrespect, who maintain dignity in the face of ignorance, who remind others that honor isn't just an old-fashioned concept. The elderly tour guide in the crowd nodded slowly, tears visible in his eyes. Parents were, "I don't expect an apology," Rossi concluded, his voice carrying a note of finality. "But I do hope that someday you'll understand what happened here today. This isn't about you or me. It's about everything we protect here. Not just buildings or individuals, but the principles they represent." With that, Rossi turned back to Captain Bianchi, saluted once more, and resumed his position with the same precision that marked his every movement. The spittle on his cheek had dried in the afternoon sun, leaving no visible mark, much like how Reynolds's attempt to stain the institution had only served to make it shine brighter. The Gendarmeria officers stepped forward now, their duty clear, but the real judgment had already been delivered, not through force or anger, but through a display of character that would be remembered long after the handcuffs clicked into place. "Assaulting a Swiss guard," one of the officers explained, his voice carrying across the now hushed crowd. "That's a serious offense, signore. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on Guard Rossi's words while we process your case." As the police led Kevin Reynolds away, his designer sunglasses slipped from his collar and clattered to the ancient cobblestones, forgotten. His friends, those same young men who had been so eager to film his prank, now couldn't meet anyone's eyes as they shuffled away from the scene, their phones finally lowered. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but many lingered, still processing what they had witnessed. In the distance, Pope Francis appeared briefly on the papal balcony for the midday Angelus. His presence a quiet blessing over a square that had just learned a profound lesson about dignity and restraint. The video spread across social media with unprecedented speed. Within 3 hours, hashtag Respect the Guard was trending in 12 languages. But unlike the thousands of tourist prank clips that populated the internet, this one struck a different chord entirely. The first viral post came from Maria Roselli, a teacher from Milan who had been visiting with her school group. "Just witnessed something incredible at the Vatican. A drunk American tourist spat on a Swiss guard, and instead of retaliation, we got a masterclass in dignity. Every parent should show this to their children." By evening, the video had been shared over 200,000 times. Comments poured in from around the globe. This is what real strength looks like, standing firm in the face of disrespect. That speech should be required viewing for anyone in public service. The contrast between entitled arrogance and quiet dignity couldn't be clearer. Reynolds' identity surfaced within hours. His family's oil company found themselves managing a PR crisis they'd never anticipated. The phone in James Reynolds' corner office in downtown Dallas rang incessantly. "Dad, I didn't think," Kevin began when he finally reached his father from the Rome police station. "No, son, you didn't think. And now the whole world knows it." Back in St. Peter's Square, the ripple effects continued to spread. Tour guides began incorporating the story into their presentations. Father Giuseppe, who conducted English language masses at a nearby church, found himself fielding questions about duty and dignity from American tourists who'd seen the video. The young guard showed us something we often forget in our modern world, that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from mastering ourselves. The story reached unexpected corners of society. At West Point Military Academy, instructors added Rossi's response to their curricula on leadership under pressure. A high school principal in Ohio played the video during an assembly on bullying. Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher from Chicago who had witnessed the incident during her Vatican tour, wrote a letter to her local newspaper. In an age where everyone seems to respond to provocation with escalation, we witnessed something rare. A man who chose dignity over retaliation, education over humiliation. 3 days after the incident, Cardinal Martinez, the Vatican's Secretary of State, made a brief public statement. "Guard Rossi's conduct exemplifies the character we hope to see in all who serve. His actions remind us that patience and measured response are not signs of weakness, but of profound strength." The legal proceedings moved swiftly through the Italian system. Reynolds appeared before Judge Francesca Lombardi, who was known for her no-nonsense approach to cases involving cultural disrespect at national monuments. Your actions were witnessed by thousands and recorded by dozens. They have been viewed millions of times worldwide. In assaulting Guard Rossi, you didn't just attack an individual. You attacked the principles of respect and dignity that he represents. The sentence was comprehensive. Reynolds was also required to write a formal letter of apology to be published in both American and Italian newspapers. The letter, when it appeared a week later, was surprisingly thoughtful. I came to Rome thinking I was entitled to treat others as props for my entertainment. Guard Rossi taught me that true strength lies not in tearing others down, but in building dignity up, in ourselves and others. Meanwhile, back in St. Peter's Square, subtle changes began to emerge. Anna Bettini, who had worked as a tour guide for 15 years, noticed it first. Tourists are different now. They still take photos, but they ask about the guards' history, their training. Before they saw costumes, now they see people. As for Guard Rossi, his viral moment found its way into training materials for military units and police forces around the world. It became a case study in how to maintain authority through character rather than force. But through it all, Rossi remained unchanged. The next day, he resumed his post with the same dedication, the same precision, the same unwavering commitment to duty. The only difference was the added depth of respect in the eyes of those who now understood exactly what it meant to stand guard over not just a place, but the principles it represented. In St. Peter's Square, where faith and tradition converge under the watchful eyes of Swiss guards in their Renaissance uniforms, one man's attempt to mock dignity had instead revealed its true power. Real strength, as the world learned that day, isn't about breaking others down. It's about standing firm in your values, even when others try to break you. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones once more, and Guard Matteo Rossi stood as he always had, motionless, dignified, a living reminder that honor and restraint remain humanity's greatest virtues, especially in an age that seems determined to forget them.